Incoterms stands for International Commercial Terms. They are the terms of trade that identify the division of costs and risks between the buyer and seller when shipping internationally. They are often discussed by buyers and sellers to define who pays for what during the sales process, including freight, port charges, clearance fees, and cargo insurance. Incoterms are defined by the International Chamber of Commerce, and they are adopted worldwide to support global trade. The latest version of the Incoterms was published in 2020. Incoterms are extremely important. You should make sure you know your Incoterms to be clear on your charges. Using Incoterms eliminates ambiguity about who pays for what and who is responsible for different parts of the shipping process. It's really important to refer to your chosen Incoterm in all communication with your manufacturers or buyers for clarity. What are the different Incoterms? There are a total of 11 Incoterms in the latest 2020 update. These are divided into two sections: Incoterms that apply to any mode of transport, Incoterms that apply to sea and inland waterway transport only. You can find each Incoterm and their description on the International Chamber of Commerce website, but let's break down one by one next. EXW, or ex-works. This Incoterm provides the seller with the least obligation in regards to shipping costs and liabilities. The seller makes the goods available at a location and the buyer must organise all elements of the shipping. This includes collection at origin, freight, delivery, duties and GST. The risk transfers to the buyer when they collect the goods from the pickup location, and the buyer takes on all costs until final delivery. In turn, this means the buyer has control over all shipping costs and options. FCA, or free carrier. For FCA shipments, the seller makes the goods available to a carrier, such as a shipping line or airline, chosen by the buyer. The seller must, however, coordinate the export clearance. From here, the risks and costs are transferred to the buyer. This includes terminal and loading charges at the port of origin. The buyer will also be responsible for all charges from freight to final delivery and customs charges at the end destination. FAS, or free alongside ship. For FAS shipments, the seller makes the goods available alongside the vessel at the port of origin and coordinates the export clearance. The seller takes on all origin charges, including terminal charges, but the buyer pays for loading onto the vessel and all charges thereafter. FOB, or free on board. When shipping on FOB terms, the seller is responsible for all origin charges. This includes loading onto the named vessel. The risks and costs are then transferred to the buyer. The buyer is then responsible for the freight and all charges to final destination. CPT, or carriage paid to. When shipping on CPT terms, the seller is responsible for making the goods available at a named place of destination. With these terms, the buyer is responsible for any additional transportation, duties and taxes. CIP, or carriage and insurance paid to. Similar to CPT, for CIP terms, the seller is responsible for making the goods available at a named place of destination. This can be a warehouse, port, or a third-party logistics facility. The seller must also procure insurance to cover the goods during transit. The buyer is only responsible for any additional transportation, duties and taxes upon arrival. CFR, or cost and freight. This term means all charges, including freight up until the intended port of destination, are borne by the seller. However, as a buyer, be cautious. The risk for the buyer takes over when the goods are loaded on the vessel. So even though you're not paying for the freight, you may want to insure your shipment. All the remaining charges at destination are then settled by the buyer. CIF, or cost, insurance and freight. This term is the same as CFR, but only the seller in this instance would also arrange insurance up until the goods arrive at the destination port. Once the goods arrive, the buyer takes on all risks and final associated charges. DPU, or delivered at place unloaded. This is the only Incoterm rule that requires the seller to unload goods at the place of destination. It requires the seller to deliver the goods after they've been unloaded by the carrier. DAP, or delivered at place. DAP means the seller is responsible for all charges up until the goods are delivered to the final location. The buyer is responsible for unloading these goods and any duties and taxes applicable. DDP, or delivery duty paid. This term represents the least cost and risk for the buyer. The seller is responsible for ensuring the goods are delivered to the final destination, customs cleared. This means the seller takes on all costs and liability for the entire shipment. The buyer is only responsible for unloading goods from road transport upon arrival at their premises. For a guide with all Incoterms and their details, download our PDF in the video description. Note, insurance is not mandatory for every Incoterm. Only CIP and CIF have a requirement to arrange insurance as part of the shipping contract. However, we would recommend all importers consider insurance in line with their risk appetite. How do you choose which Incoterm to ship on? This really comes down to a couple of factors. How much control you want over your shipping, how much control you want over costs, how much risk you are willing to take on. For importers, we often find suppliers pushing to agree CFR or DAP Incoterms. Whilst on the surface this can seem less work for the importer, be wary. By allowing your supplier to control your freight, you can end up paying a higher product cost or high arrival charges. We would encourage importers to consider EXW or FOB as a preferred Incoterm, as this will give you the most control over the service and associated costs. Who defines the Incoterm, the seller or the buyer? There is no set party responsible for choosing the Incoterm. It will normally be selected by negotiation between buyer and seller. To understand what is best for your business, it is always worth comparing charges on a variety of Incoterms. A good freight forwarder will allow you to do this and advise which option is the best for you. ICE has over 30 years' experience with commercial shipping to and from Australia. Give us a call for a tailored consultation on Incoterms and benefit from a seamless shipping process today.